Good evening, members, and welcome to this meeting of the Stronger Communities and Neighbourhood Services Scrutiny Board on Thursday, 4th of November. Tonight we are joined by officers including Mrs. Alison McGrary, the Communities and Partnerships, Alan Brown, Highways and Environment. We also have Andrew Callingham, Head of Services, Saviour Communities. We have invited guests tonight with us, and thank you for all of you taking your time to be here. Just going through some of the, before the start of the meeting, may I remind everyone that this hybrid meeting will be broadcast live via the Council's YouTube channel, and the footage will be archived for future viewing. All participants are in control of their own microphones, and please speak clearly at all times and turn your microphones off when you have made your contribution. I will now ask Mr. Stevenson to confirm the attendance for tonight's meeting.
Thank you, Chairman. You have one substitution this evening, Councillor Hall Allen. Councillor Pinwell is her substitute. Also apologies from Councillor Rolfe, the Cabinet Member for Stronger and Safer Communities. And just in addition to the introductions you did a moment ago, Chairman, joining virtually for this meeting, we have Diane Hurt, who is the Team Leader for Food and Safety. She's attending for item 7. And we also have Mark O'Connell, the Council's Head of Highway Infrastructure, who's attending virtually for item 8 on your. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Lee. First item on the agenda, are there any apologies or absence?
Chairman, yes, I've just covered those. So we have apologies from Councillor Hall Allen and Councillor Rolfe. So the next item on your agenda is the declaration of interest.
Thank you. Any declaration of interest from the members?
Members, those can be declared now if you wish, or at any point during the meeting. Thank you.
I see none. Thank you. Any questions and deputations?
Chairman, there's none received. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Agenda number item 4 is to consider the approval of the draft minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of September 2021, pages 7 to 12 before you. Are members happy to approve these minutes? Councillor Gibbon?
Just one observation, Chair. It was on page 11 on the action point 3 there on resolved. It's in relation to the individual actions owned by Westminster Police for the hate crime action plan be strengthened. We had a report coming through yesterday, which was a statistical analysis of hate crime within the borough. We haven't seen a report come back in relation to strengthening the actions, anything beyond core business.
Do we have any comments?
Chairman, if it helps, I can note those comments and we can follow it up after the meeting.
Okay, please, thank you. Any more comments? Are we happy to approve the minutes? Thank you. Right. The next agenda item is the Safer Solihull Partnership Key Priority Update, Violence with Injury Under 25s. And that's pages 13 to 18. We have Chief Superintendent Ian Parnell from the West Midlands Police, Commander for Solihull, who are in person attending this meeting. We will present this item. So Ian, do you want to present your report, please? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for inviting me this evening. Welcome from myself. My name is Ian Parnell. I'm the Chief Superintendent and Commander for Solihull. I'm also the Partnership Lead for Youth Violence across the borough. So my intention this evening was to present for about 10 minutes and then provide an opportunity for you to ask me some questions and provide some feedback on our approach to violence across the borough. So I intend to provide an overview and some context, followed by describing what our public health approach to tackling youth violence would look like, and then finally describing, most importantly, how we're going to deliver this across Solihull. There are some slides which we are able to provide and share with you as well. Hopefully you can see them on the screens. Thank you. So in terms of context, I would describe youth violence as a really complex problem. And it's not a problem that we can solve through policing alone. It requires a multi-agency approach, and it does require some complex joined-up solutions across agencies. And this first slide just describes the local context across all of West Midlands, where we have seen youth violence increase over consecutive years, and now West Midlands Police, policing area, we have high levels of youth violence comparable to some of the busiest areas in the country. Thank you. But what you will be clearly more interested in is the local context here in Solihull, and certainly that's my focus as well. And so presented on this slide is some data which on the left-hand side shows reported crime this year compared to 2 years ago. And the reason we do 2 years ago is that last year the data is a bit of a non-entity due to the lockdown, so we wanted a meaningful comparison. And on the right-hand side of the chart is the data around outcomes, so where we've positively resolved crime which may result in an offender being brought to justice or an out-of-court disposal. So just focusing very briefly on the left-hand side, what we've seen this year is a reduction in knife crime across the borough. We have seen a reduction in robbery across the borough, but what we have seen is an increase in youth violence of about 4.41%, or about 10 offences year to date. And when I describe youth violence, what I am talking about here is public place violence, violence associated with the nighttime economy. But what we have seen recently is an increase in assaults against police officers, and many of our new officers are actually under 25 years of age. And so that's why that information is included there as well. On the right-hand side of the table are what we call our detections, or our positive outcomes. And outcomes for robbery and violence with injury are around 11% of recorded crime. Clearly some room for improvements here, but pretty much comparable to other crime types. So there are no major outliers there. When we look at the kind of longer term picture, we can see that when we look at the totality of crime across Solihull, youth violence and sexual offences consist of a large proportion of these crimes. They are the main focus of what we see across Solihull. This is 2020 data. The data has been more brought up to date, but we have seen consistent year-on-year increases in youth violence and in sexual offences across the borough of Solihull. Thank you. When we look where this is happening, it shows a really clear picture that there is a greater propensity in the north of the borough, around Solihull town centre, and also around the NEC and the airport. And evidence suggests that there are strong links between the levels of crime, along with inequality, deprivation and need. Thank you. More specifically, if we were to examine knife crime, which is a particular area of focus for us, we can see that in the left-hand chart, we have knife crime hotspots where a knife has been used, seen or threatened in the commission of offence that mirrors that north of the borough, Solihull town centre and some across the Shirley area. On the right-hand side chart, you can see where we have reports of knife possession. This is where somebody is caught in possession of a knife, and again, that mirrors those areas that we've seen for knife offences and also deprivation as well on some occasions. What I would point out, though, around knife possession is that it is what we call a found committing offence. And so we don't really understand the true extent of offending around knife possession, because it only comes to our notice when somebody is caught in the act or it is reported by a member of the public. True levels of knife possession are probably far higher than this, and we really work closely to try and understand where that gap is between reality and what we have reported. One of the key pieces of direction that have come out from the Home Office over the past few months is around what we call the serious violence duty. And this is around requiring authorities, and it doesn't specify what an authority is, to have in place a local plan to deal with violence in the locality. And this plan needs to follow what we call a public health approach, something that we've used already around tackling domestic abuse, and something that looks at the root causes and the systematic issues that surround violence. Thank you. And again, please. So what are we looking at when we talk around a public health approach? We're talking around surveillance, identifying the risk and protective factors. We're talking around developing and evaluating options and interventions, and we're talking about implementing. We're all too familiar with this approach delivered through the pandemic in terms of our approach to tackling COVID. We've used it already nationally around tackling domestic abuse, and it has got some really good opportunities to make long-term interventions. But what I would say is that tackling youth violence is absolutely not just a policing problem. So our approach is going to mirror this, and what this next slide shows is that youth life cycle from birth through to age 18. And what this clearly shows is that one size does not fit all when it comes to putting in place violence interventions. We need to look at the key stages of young people's lives and apply the appropriate intervention and remedy at that stage. So this may involve working with parents for younger children. It may involve working with schools during the school age, but also it involves identifying those people that are at risk of offending and those that are repeat offenders and applying different solutions during the course of their life cycle. Thank you. And so and again, please, we now move on to what does this look like for Solihull moving forward. And I've started off with the outcomes framework, and the chart on the left, which you clearly won't have opportunity to read fully now, just describes how we're looking at tackling the root causes, transforming young people's lives, and doing this for a whole systems approach. But more importantly, what is it that we are trying to achieve? Well, we're trying to prevent young people from becoming involved in violence. That has to be the key aim of the approach. We're also trying to reduce the harm that is caused to those and by those who commit violence offences. And thirdly, and I think this is really important as well, that we're looking to lessen the harm and reduce the risk of future violence offending by working around our locations and working around our vulnerable people and vulnerable families. Thank you. So locally, we are going to tackle this in 4 specific areas. We're looking at early years, primary education, secondary education, and post-education. We're looking at the service offers that partners can provide in each of these areas, and we're applying the right partner to the right solution, because we need to understand who is best placed to deliver these interventions. What I can confirm also is that, I take my policing role very seriously, and we've arranged for an uplift in police officers to tackle these specific issues moving forward. And so from the middle of next year, there will be 4 staff that are based within our pupil referral units on the borough. There'll be 2 staff that are dedicated to schools-based officers, and there'll be 5 officers working closely with families, pushing the early help agenda. Thank you. We will focus on the nighttime economy, where we know there are key issues. We will focus on the town centres during daytime as well, where we sometimes have opposing groups congregate and cause issues. We will focus on our transport hubs, where we know we get people travelling in from outside of the borough to commit offences, in particular robbery. We will focus on the hotspots, areas that are emerging as issues, and tackle those as they emerge. And we will focus on our open spaces, and more specifically, I'm talking about parks and other green areas. Another part of our approach will involve maximising the use of data. We are currently exploring opportunities to maximise data use across partners, be more predictive in our analysis so that we're not reacting to issues, we're forecasting where the future issues are going to be and putting our joint resources there to tackle them in a joined up way. And then finally, in terms of where we are in relation to progress, We've conducted a mapping exercise across all the partners to understand their service offers and what they can do in terms of supporting our approach to tackling violence. We've mapped that out, and we're currently in the process of developing an action plan to help deliver that. And then moving forward, we will set some clear performance measures and accountability and report regularly into the Safer Solihull Partnership. There is far more going on than that, but I'm conscious of time. I just wanted to give you a bit of an insight into the work we're doing across the partnership to tackle youth violence. And this starts next week, where we have Operation Sceptre running, which is a dedicated operation run nationally, delivered locally to tackle knife crime across the borough. I'll pause there, Chair, for questions that colleagues may have.
Thank you, and very informative report. Thank you for presentation. Members, have you got any questions? Councillor Gibbons.
Thank you, Chair. Ian, first read this report, and obviously the actions were agreed in January of this year in relation to this being one of the key priorities. And then I noticed progress to date was we had a meeting in August about it, and then a workshop in September. And then we turned the page. We had a half-page action plan with no detail and no progress to date. You've provided a little bit of reassurance in terms of, I suppose, the strategic outlook on it. But my concern was, obviously, as you'll know, early in this performance year, West Midlands Police came out as the force with the least public confidence in the country. And indeed had the lowest satisfaction rates of any police force in England and Wales. When you broke that down and looked at the latest force performance, you look at Dudley with the highest satisfaction policing rate of 57.7 and Solihull being the lowest at 22.2. For me, this report didn't really actually say anything about what is going to happen. And it concerns me if this report and this action plan is for the current performance year. We're getting close to the end of that performance year. We've got sort of 4 months to do this in now.
Okay, thank you for the question. So I would describe that there is lots and lots of tactical activity taking place every week across the partnership. What we're talking about here is a really complex intergenerational issue that can't be solved by simple solutions. It's a wicked problem, therefore it takes some time to unpick. And so part of that approach involves working nationally, understanding what the offer is from the violence reduction unit locally, and working clearly with partners to understand in lots of detail where we can sort of provide the greatest leverage. I don't think the report does justice to the work that's been done, and hopefully some of the insight that I've provided today is able to help reassure you around that. But this is not a plan for a year. This is a longer term strategic plan that we need to think through and have developed in the right way. I think if we do things too quickly and we do things that are too superficial, it won't make a longer term impact, because we need to be focusing that whole life cycle, starting with those kids at primary school and working all the way through to those that are most risk of offending.
Thank you, Chair, for the supplementary. Obviously, this group is the formal scrutiny committee as required under the Crime Disorder Act, as I'm sure you're aware. The problem I do still have, though, Ian, and it is with the greatest respect, is what are we measuring if we're here to scrutinise and to provide comments and provide robust challenge? Not very little information here to challenge you on. To me, I suppose the worst case scenario, somebody could say, well, this is just smoke mirrors. This is a few slides. This is what we're going to do in the future. We've got nothing here in terms of an action plan. We've got a public health approach, which you and I will probably know it's not that dissimilar to the national intelligence model in the early days. But what are we actually delivering? So if we're here to hold you to account, how do we do that?
So thank you for your comments. I can only present what I can present today. There's an invitation that I extend to all board members here. If you want to come and see in reality what is being delivered, come and see that with us. We need to develop that performance framework. I accept that, and work will be progressing on that in the very near future. But we are where we are with this. This is a very complex problem, and if there was a simple solution, we'd have already applied it. This is not unique to Solihull. We have major issues in terms of youth violence across all of the UK. And, if you're asking me, can I solve the burglary and robbery and vehicle crime problems? We know how to do that because we've been doing that for many years. This is far more nuanced than that. So this is where we are with it at the moment. I accept it's unfinished business, and I'm really keen to work with our partners and provide you greater insight moving forward.
Any more questions? Councillor Sheshabhatu?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank Chief Inspector Ian Parnell for the wonderful presentation. Thanks for your time today. And I think I've interacted with you in a couple of other forums previously. As part of that presentation, I would like to bring in a couple of points that I've noted actually. Local plan, maximizing data. As one of the representative from the north of the borough, it makes me feel a bit little sad to see always north of the borough has been an ongoing issue since comparing with the last few years. Data is always north of the borough has got high in the stats. So the steps which were taken so far, have they shown any effect in the reduction of the stats? That's number one. Yeah.
So I think we're only as good as the intelligence, the information that we've got. From a policing perspective in particular, we have 2 areas in the north of the borough that we've identified as what we call impact areas, where we know we need to make the greatest impact to improve the quality of life for residents up there. We regularly have activity that takes place in those areas. We're working really hard to engage with communities, to bring them on board, to get them more engaged and participatory in policing. So we have volunteers that now participate in things like knife sweeps to look for weapons that have been discarded. But yeah, there's definitely more to be done in this area. But I think the key to driving it forward is community engagement. So any support that you can provide around that would be most welcome.
Councillor Penwell? Sorry, Councillor, you had any supplementary question? I'll take you after that.
Sorry, yes, Chair, thank you. Sorry, yeah, I have a couple more questions linking to what I've already asked. The base for the stats that you showed is actually, majority of them are from reports calling in or from different calls or references from other agencies, I suppose. But what I've noticed, and which you've also escalated previously, was that the 101 calls have not been so effective. So is there any data that shows that the number of calls dropped from the residents? And if so, what happened with them? Because obviously that could have affected our stats as well in many ways.
Thank you, councillors. So I cannot give you specific details right now on calls dropped for Solihull. That is something I could go away and look at. But what I can tell you is that we have 2 service levels across all of the West Midlands in terms of call handling. One is for emergency call handling and one is for non-emergency call handling. So if it helps, I can describe where we are with that at the moment. But that would be on a regional basis rather than just a Solihull basis. So in terms of emergency call demand, this is 999. We intend to answer 90% of calls within 10 seconds. We are currently operating at 82.1%, so it's just below what our expectation would be around that. What we have seen, though, is a significant increase in calls over the past few months. And what we can't do is predict when those calls will come. And so what you tend to have are periods of the day where we are very good at answering emergency calls, and then there'll be peak periods which we cannot predict with any degree of regularity, where demand will exceed our capability. In terms of non-emergency, which is what is used to report the majority of crime that has taken place, that doesn't require an immediate response, but does require some form of police response. This is an area where we do need to improve our service and is particularly challenging. And so we aim to answer 90% of non-emergency calls within 3 minutes, and our current performance force-wide is 30% in relation to that. Which again needs significant improvements. What we are seeing again in this area is particular increases in demand. And what we are trying to do is what we call channel shift, and shift a number of the callers from using the telephone into using live chat and other ways of reporting. There's some work that's going on with our contact department at the moment to signpost members of the public to use these online forums. But what we still get time and time again are people calling the police for non-policing purposes, and that clogs up those phone lines for those people that need it.
Thank you. One last question, obviously, again, following the presentation, actually, there more needs to be done, especially towards the north of the borough, and especially there's been a high demand from the residents of seeing the on-foot patrols more often where possible, or maybe on bike, so that obviously not just seeing police in the cars, but the more presence and more visibility. I'm also a part of Street Watch, so however, obviously, if more promotion can be done to encourage the community to join that will be appreciable. Obviously, I think that will affect crime reduce in that area. I guess that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Councillor Pinwell, did you have a question to ask?
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if we could turn to para 3.6 of the report, and that sets out the 3 areas on which the strategy is focused: early identification, intervention and prevention, and then enforcement. And I wonder if we could use a couple of those to illustrate what we mean by a multi-agency approach and try and unpack to inform us a little more thoroughly as to what practically will happen on the ground. Now, I would say from what my ear to the ground tells me that the nighttime economy and Poplar Road in particular is a serious hotspot. There have been several significant events in Poplar Road in the last couple of years. And how can a multi-agency approach be used to assist with that, particularly at this time when the threat of the knife is being expanded with the threat of the needle as well? You don't list the businesses as key stakeholders in para 3.5, but presumably the businesses in the nighttime economy are very germane to getting some control over what is happening in those arenas and actually being able to make an intervention and prevent something going down. And then moving on to the sort of early identification and intervention business, absolutely, it must be critical to identify youngsters that are growing up with the potential for that sort of violence. And I presume we're talking about the sort of individuals that are indicating very mild forms of violent threat in the classroom in particular, which I presume is why we're looking at education and trying to turn people around in the education system. But are we talking about a multi-agency approach going into schools where certainly my experience on the ground in North Solihull suggests that the teachers can't control the sort of kids that are going to potentially grow up to commit a significantly violent incident. And any sort of intervention that they might look to perform at that stage of a child's development is likely to be rejected. So I just wonder if you could take those 2 scenarios and unpack it a bit for us. Thank you.
Yes, of course, and thank you for the question. So in terms of the role of the nighttime economy and the pubs and the licensed premises, absolutely key stakeholder. We need to work really closely with them. That may involve working with SIA trained staff. It may be working around licensing conditions. It's around the whole environment. So 100% agree with that approach. And that is stuff that's happening already. We have the Ask Angela campaign already running in Solihull Town Centre, which is around providing places of safety and giving the opportunity for people that are vulnerable to engage. In terms of the areas you mentioned, I think it's probably easier if I give an illustrative example or 2 just to demonstrate what we mean by early identification and intervention and prevention. And so in terms of a partnership approach, what this might look like is that a school teacher reports via the local partnership framework that a child is repeatedly bringing a penknife into school. Clearly, that's not an offence where I'm going to send my staff and start making arrests. but it probably needs some form of early intervention to understand why that's happening. And that early intervention may be working with the parents, trying to understand the root causes. Are there any other reasons? Are they scared? Are they afraid? That may take it in that form. I suppose moving one step up, we may then get a report from a social worker that a young person is in possession of a knife in a public place, and they've not come to police note before. They're from a supportive background, and this is their first offence. And so once again, the approach from policing can't be to go in there, arrest that individual and put them through the criminal justice system, because what we know, that will create further issues. And so what we would look to do is look at what diversionary schemes are available via our partners to try and prevent future offending and divert them away from that criminal justice pathway. So just a couple of illustrative examples of how this may manifest itself moving forward, and those things are actually happening now.
Do you have any supplementary question, Councillor? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief Superintendent, for the report. I want to go back to the issue of 101. It's something that I've mentioned in the past at similar meetings to this. There have been issues where things have been reported more than once, and it hasn't been picked up because I was told there was no crossover, there's no database to log various calls, so for example, if you see a quad bike and somebody else reports that same one the following week, there's no crossover, or even if the same caller reports that, there is no crossover. And I think that sort of integration and interface between various calls through 101 would lead to better intelligence on that, and that was a concern. I'd like to know your thoughts about that, actually, how that could be improved, because of there's 4 of us here as well from the north of the borough, and that would be alongside impact weeks, because I know there's one coming up I think in 2 weeks' time or 3 weeks' time in Smiths Wood. So I think that would be a useful step forward. Again, I am concerned that people are being shoved towards, online reporting. I do in my ward, we have people, there's a lot of, sort of digital poverty and digital exclusion. Elderly people, if there's something going on nearby and they can hear it, we have walkways, we have some quite sort of lonely places off the beaten track in many of the wards in the north, and I'm speaking, with 4 of us here from wards in the north, and that can cause very, very significant anxiety to those vulnerable people. So I do implore that 101 improves, because there's a lot of people, as I say, they won't be using like digital, email or whatever it might be, whatever interface it might be. So those are just the points that I'd like to make. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. And it's not my area of specialism, but I will do my best to try and answer those queries. I wasn't expecting those questions tonight, but we'll do my very best. So first of all, we have a number of integrated command and control systems. We have a system that is called ControlWorks that deals with our telephony and command and control deployment of resources. And we have a system called Connect, which is everything else: investigation, intelligence, all of the back office functions. Those systems do talk to each other. If you was to call today and you was to call in a week's time, the system would recognise that is the same caller, and it would automatically bring up the previous call, and we are able to link those incidents. So I was a little surprised to hear you say that. So perhaps there's some reassurance we can give you that the systems do talk to each other and are integrated. I think the point you make around technology poverty and the inability sometimes to use those online channels absolutely is relevant. I do have my neighbourhood teams that are embedded in the community in the north. I hope that you've seen my PCSOs and my police officers on patrol. They're always available to be spoken to and to report incidents to. And more importantly, work with communities to come up with solutions as well, because what we are really proud of from a policing perspective in Solihull is the amount of community engagement and involvement from communities in solutions such as Street Watch and Speed Watch and some of the other activity as well. I think this is probably one around 101 that I can take away and get you some more information on, and more than welcome to come back and perhaps bring a more specialised colleague to talk around that at a future meeting. So I'm happy to facilitate that. But it is an area that I have got some knowledge on, but it is not my area of expertise. So hopefully that's provided some reassurance that the systems do talk, but I absolutely accept the points you make around the performance and also around the technology poverty as well.
Do you have any supplementary, Councillor? Yeah. Councillor Hogarth, and then I'll have Councillor Bray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good evening to you, Chief Superintendent. I could have been raising this in this particular item or in the next one with regard to safeguarding of females in the borough in general. But seeing that it was being raised by yourself with the intervention and prevention section, and Councillor Pinwell mentioning the town centre nighttime economy, I have to go back in the past for some years now when I instigated the taxi traffic marshals. And it was down to my insistence that this actually took place and was able to get the funding for it. And as far as I was aware, it was still in operation. But by the report that I've seen in the last 48 hours or so, there's a Mr. Rodriguez. I couldn't attend the West Locality group because I had something else to deal with. But it suddenly came up into this particular report a few weeks ago, and then I've seen the minutes yesterday. And I've been in touch with Mr. Rodriguez about the taxi marshal scheme. Now, I sincerely hope that if it has been, shall we say, in suspense because of lack of funding, that it will be going ahead again very, very quickly. Because I do believe that it safeguarded an awful lot of people in the disturbances that used to occur, say in Poplar Road, for instance, by the taxi rank, where a group of people were waiting, quite orderly, and then along comes 2 or 3 loudmouth so-and-sos, putting it bluntly, and they try and jump the queue, and then altercations take place. Also, from my memory, that a taxi driver, for instance, was going to be taking someone who may be slightly intoxicated or even more than that, the marshal would turn around and say, "Where are you going?" Just mentions Shirley. "Right, taxi driver, how much is it to Shirley?" And he says, say £3. And they handed over the money prior to leaving the spot, so there wouldn't be any loss to the driver. I sincerely hope that we will be getting the taxi marshals back into Solihull as quickly as possible to help to relieve the problems that you have to have with disturbances. We've had a couple of very serious murders in the borough, in the town centre, in those locations. And I think that if it has been, shall we say, suspended for some time, that it will be reintroduced, not only for people who, ladies, gentlemen, boys and girls, whatever, everyone needs protecting. And that was a scheme that really did work because I monitored it for a long, long time, but I just understood that it was still running. I know it had problems financially, but it must come back. And not just probably for a Friday and Saturday, Sundays as well, and maybe other days when it's busy as well. And I hope that I can get that support from your good selves and the authority as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hogarth. So that is exactly the type of idea and initiative that I think would help around the nighttime economy. Clearly, from a policing perspective, where you have groups of people congregating late at night, that sometimes does lead to antisocial behaviour and disorder. That is stating the obvious, I know. And any capability that is there to remove people from the location has a knock-on effect in reducing crime, making people feel safer, and removing the issues at this first opportunity. And so I will take that feedback on board. I think we can factor it into our plan moving forward. I can't answer specifically on the taxi marshals. That's not my area of business. But what I can say is that taxi marshals are just one solution. I think, you know, street pastors, street doctors, having people that are available to support patrons when they come out of pubs and clubs is really helpful, and that helps prevent violence. So I will take them on board and feed them back into certainly my group. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Alison, would you like to make a comment?
Yeah, I can add to that. Just to clarify that taxi marshals have been in existence, but over the years, I think the times they're there has been reduced. So we've always made sure that we've had them bank holiday weekends and at times when we've been particularly busy. So there's been discussion recently through the joint work we're doing with the police about that's a key factor and that we need to look to reinstate it. The funding for taxi marshals has been coming from money we get from the Community Safety Partnership through the West Midlands PCC, and we've recently asked to transfer some funding that we were using for other things to be able to fund more taxi marshals. So it's absolutely a priority in that shared action plan. I think you raised an interesting point around that idea of marshals making sure the fare was paid up front. I think that's a great idea. I don't know whether that still happens, but I think one of the key things in the action plan that Di's pulling together on behalf of the partnership is training for not just taxi marshals, it's training for taxi drivers, it's training for door staff on the type of things they can do to support the safety of people in the nighttime economy. So I think that's actually something that we need to make sure that we pick up in that work.
Councillor Hogarth, do you have supplementary
Well,
question?
it's just pleased to hear that, because in actual fact, when it started in its infancy, all those sort of things that I mentioned earlier was actually working. And I was chairman of licensing for a number of years, and I had taxi drivers saying how much they welcomed it because they felt secure, safer. And also, of course, it meant that the people who are behaving properly in the queue were able to feel safe whilst they waited for a taxi. And it is important. And so, as I say, it also reflects into the next item with the female concerns. So I welcome that, and I hope it goes on every weekend, certainly as necessary.
Thank you. Councillor Brain.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm afraid I have to go back to the point about the 101 service. I am finding it is a massive, massive barrier for individuals to report matters. I myself last week tried to report a matter, was on the phone for 1.5 hours without getting through to anybody. Simultaneously, I went on to the other delivery channel, which is obviously the online channel. I'd waited 45 minutes. I was still the 14th in the queue, so there was not really any chance of me getting through. Now, what concerns me is that contact centre technology is a very, very established technology. It's been around 30, 40 years. It's not particularly difficult. It's well established. The technology is very established, but there seems to be a particular issue here. Now, you mentioned about in terms of providing stats, it would be interesting to see what the upshift has been in terms of calls presented. I know that the 999 service has around about 2 million calls presented every year. I'm not aware that there's been a massive upshift in this. The 30% rate that you're suggesting would suggest that there would be an upshift of around about 400% in the amount of calls presented. I think that's fairly unlikely. We could do with knowing what the average handling times are. We need to know how many calls are presented. We need to know, and I think this is the core of the problem, the attrition rate of staff. Now, we know that there is a problem in terms of the resilience of staff, because you can't simply go from, say, for example, answering calls at a bank to going answering calls on a telephone line for the police, because it's emotionally very difficult. But but as I say, I'm aware that the attrition rate there is very, very high. And at the end of the day, contact centres are reliant on the amount of people there. Now, the alternative channel is going to have the same problem. If there aren't enough bums on seats, they're not going to be able to answer calls or basically type in. We also need to know what the average wait time is, handling time, and in terms of what's going on in terms of call prediction. Call prediction is a pretty established science. It's not, as I say, you don't need to have huge amounts of people doing that. You just monitor the amount of calls coming in. you had a clear understanding of that, you can then offset that to how you structure your shifts. But this is a major barrier to individuals presenting. So simply if somebody tries to call through, they cannot get through, call doesn't get recorded, the call doesn't get recorded, the crime's not recorded, people lose confidence in it, and they don't bother using the service anymore.
Thank you, Councillor. So I do have some of that information that I can share. So for September this year, I'm talking around across all of West Midlands Police, for emergency calls, there were 72,000 emergency calls during that month. This is the second highest volume that we've ever received and was an increase of 5% on the month before. The average handling time for each call was 3 minutes 53 seconds, and the average time to answer the emergency calls was 14 seconds. But I'm conscious that the information that you're keen on is the non-emergency calls. And so again for September, there were 62,000 calls for service. This was an increase in 6.64% compared to the previous month. And the average handling time for each call was 7 minutes and 50 seconds. And the average time to answer the phone call was 14 minutes and 19 seconds. Unfortunately, the average time to abandon calls, so that is how long somebody stayed on the line on average before they hung up, was 12 minutes 23. Where you've got an average time to an abandon that is less than the average time to answer, that clearly has then led to that service level being at 30% rather than at 90. I get a real strong sense of concern from you all, so that's something as the police lead for this borough I will take back, and permitted by the chair, myself or colleagues are more than welcome to attend in future if that's what you wish, to provide more detailed responses around this, and more specifically in relation to residents of Solihull, which is what's your concern.
So, Bryn, you have supplementary?
Very quick supplementary. Sorry, what's the attrition rate in terms of staff?
That's not information I have to hand, sorry. There is a turnover of staff. There's quite a large turnover of staff from our contact and control centres into policing, joining as police officers and PCSOs, which is a positive thing. Obviously, the negative side of that is it does take a while to train up somebody to be an emergency call handler, which is quite a specialist skill.
Okay. So I'm aware the industry average in terms of contact centres is about 24% per annum. Are we higher or lower than that? It seems to suggest that we're probably higher than that.
Yeah, that's information I don't have to hand, sorry.
Any more questions from the members? Councillor Gibbon?
Chair, thank you. Assistant to my colleague, Councillor Brain, I'm on the Police and Crime panel, and the performance in relation to 101 and to 999 was presented in a couple of weeks ago, so that public report's on there. But I think as Mr Parnell just said, we've got 72,000 calls coming in for September on the 9s and 62 on 101. So we are now recognising, in terms of where GMP were a few months ago, that more people now call 999 because they can't get through on 101. And that's those figures there, 62,000 versus 72, and we can all see the reasons why, because the phone calls don't get answered. So then they ring the 9s. But that is urgently being reviewed, and it is obviously leads to sort of huge dissatisfaction, of course. And lifeblood, intelligence is the lifeblood of policing, and if people aren't being able to speak to the police, you fail in that first duty there. In terms, just want to come back to my original point, Chair. We have that report before us. We have the recommendations on page 13 at 2.1 and 2.2. And the recommendations for this committee. My concern is still there, and as a committee that has that lawful duty put upon it to consider, we had the update on the work completed so far, but and again, this is with respect. What we've had so far is stats on where we currently are, not what we're going to be doing going forward. I think really for me it would be we make some recommendations around the clarity on the plan. When does it start? When does it end? What are the key dates? We've got a Home Office crime classification there in terms of what we're looking at, which is violence involving injury with the age group there. We know, obviously, we're going up at 8% increase. So what are we going to be judging it against? We're looking at a 5% year-on-year reduction, for example, versus 2019. I'm just plucking figures here. Something that we can say we're actually achieving. This is how we're doing it. So that is the job of this committee. And at the moment, I don't see any way we could possibly do that with what we've got in front of us. Thank you.
Would you like to respond?
There's nothing further I'd like to add in relation to what I've said already. Take on board the feedback. We'll continue to work really closely with partners and actually listen carefully to the comments that have been made around the specifics of the measures that you'd like to see.
Thank you. Any more questions? Yes, please.
You mentioned about working with the pupil referral units. Could you tell me which ones you're working with and what sort of schemes you're looking to put into place?
So the staff that are due to join us in June, July next year will be based within the pupil referral units. We haven't made a determination yet which ones they're going to. We haven't yet established fully what their remit will be. That is currently work in progress through the National Uplift Programme to increase numbers of police officers into West Midlands Police.
These are PRUs in Solihull, yes? These are PRUs based in Solihull?
Yes, there will be the PRUs based in Solihull, yes.
Thank you. Right, members. Clearly, nothing can be more important than providing a safe and secure environment for our children to grow up in. So only a highly committed partnership working closely with the communities and families that experience violence will achieve a lasting differences and improve in our safety in our borough. Just to draw your attention, members, to what we've been asked to do, that's in the page 13, paragraph 2.1 and 2.2, to provide the board with an update of the work completed so far and to support the ongoing work to produce a multi-agency strategies for the addressing these violent in under 25s. Are we members happy that we've considered the update? Councillor Hogarth? Thank you. I propose that if members agree that we bring this back to scrutiny in 12 months' time to show the outcome and progress of these actions, clearly set out an action plan following the comments that members have made tonight. We agree in that?
Disagree, Chair.
Thank you.
No, sorry, I disagree.
Do we have a disagreement?
Yeah.
Councillor Gibbons, do you want to?
No, sorry, my disagreement is we're bringing it back in 12 months, the plan. We haven't really got a plan. We've seen a little bit of one, but we've got no measurables, we've got no targets. It's as much as saying, here's my plan, here's a book, and I'll tell you about it in 12 months. We haven't got a plan that we've actually seen. If you can show me somewhere in here it says we're going to reduce violence with injury by 5%, we're going to be doing X, Y, and Z. At the moment, all we've got is half a page. Map provision, data, looking at sharing, contextual safeguarding. We've just got, you know, agency leads, owner, educator. We've got nothing here. How can you, as a committee that's lawfully charged to scrutinise this, say this is acceptable? If you wish to move it, then I will.
Any comments you want to make here?
I'd be more than happy to bring this back in 3 months' time if that helps and provide more detailed updates based on some of the feedback today.
Chairman, would be very, very good indeed to hear, because we've listened about the problems, the increase in, sadly, with knife crime, etc. My taxi marshals, if you like to put it, to see if it's all actually happening and if we see some reduction in the situation that we've heard this evening. So if Chief Superintendent Ian Parnell can come back in 3 months' time and say, well, we've got a 5% drop or whatever it might be, or hopefully not an increase, that we are seeing progress. And that would be, I think, happy with your good self. that that would be the best way forward. 12 months is a long time to wait. So therefore, I would be very happy and content to support what Ian Parnell has just said, that he'd bring a report back in 3 months' time.
Ian, you're happy? Right?
Yes, Chair, that's no problem at all with myself.
Brilliant. Thank you. Councillor Gloom.
May I make one further request, sort of in line with that? Obviously, the report itself was quite short and the slides gave us a lot more context around it. If you're coming back in 3 months, would it be possible that we receive any slides sort of a day or so before the before we have the scrutiny committee, so that we can scrutinise the data that's in them ahead of there? Because some of the councillors are incredibly sharp. My improvisational skills aren't quite up with theirs.
Yes, of course, Chair, that's no problem at all.
Thank you. Right, so agenda item number 6. For this next item on the agenda, we are being asked to consider the report on Safer Solihull Partnership Key Priority Update, Violence Against Women and Girls, pages 90 through 30 before you. And tonight we have Diane Rodden, Associate Director of Nursing Safeguarding, Birmingham and Solihull Clinical Commissioning Group, who will be presenting this report. Diane, would you like to present your report, please? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Lee. Just to say, I'm listening to the conversation. This priority overlaps a lot with what Ian has just spoken about, but we are more at the start of the journey for this one. So to start with, from a data collection point of view, there's a piece of work happening because we can't narrow it down into some of the categories that the police do on their systems. And Ian, tell me if I've got this wrong. We can't narrow that down as to what is going on with women and girls. So there's a piece of work that I'm doing with West Midlands Police at the moment, so that hopefully we'll be able to get those stats. So when you're looking at performance, you can see that we're improving, or not, as the case may be. In violence against women and girls, just to be clear, that one of the key deliverables is that we get more reporting through. So actually we do want to see that rise to the police. So that was just to start the conversation, really. Thanks, Lee. So VOG, as I will call it from now on, obviously has come to national attention following the murders of Sever Everard and Sabina Nessa. And actually we'd chosen as a Safer Solihull Partnership to have this as one of our priorities anyway. But I think that's just reinforced the need for Solihull to do this. It's an overarching umbrella term, so it covers a lot of violence out there, but it refers to the acts of violence or abuse that's known to disproportionately affect women and girls. But as you can see there, that can be rape, domestic abuse, stalking, honour-based violence such as FGM, as well as other things that are committed online. And one of the key that there is not actually in the strategy is something known as upskirting. Sorry. Yeah, is upskirting. So again, we would like to see that get out to the public, so that the public actually realise that that is a reportable offence. Thanks, Lee. So the next slide, it just really shows what's happened over the summer, really. So the government launched their Tackling Violence Against Women and Girls strategy in July 21. West Midlands Police have got their own strategy. There is out there, and there's also their interim report into the inspection of how effectively the police engage with women and girls. So that's what's going on nationally and regionally to drive the agenda. Thanks, Lee. So this is just a slide of some of the things that the working group came up with when we just sat down to discuss what we needed to do. So you can see the national strategy had come out the week before we had the working group. So it was decided that we'd use that as an audit tool and map against current activity, to which we have done. There was a lot of talk about, as Ian's just been talking about, is education for youngsters, even starting as primary school. So changing the culture and behaviours of boys and girls. So the socialisation of boys and male behaviour needs to be addressed, and that's some work that's been going on with the VRU. The VRU are putting packages together, waiting sign-off so that we'll all be singing from the same hymn sheet. There was also, we're going to have a statement that will go across Solihull to businesses, to schools, everywhere, which will say that there's zero tolerance towards violence against women and girls, and that is in draft format. I don't want to go all through them because that's in the report, but those are some of the key things that we brought out. Thanks, Lee. So to date, the first 3 points we've already discussed, which is the commissioning of the town marshals. We've also, what we need to do is we need to go out into Solihull and find out where women and girls feel unsafe. So we're going to do that. We've met with a Seroptimist group who are keen to be a part of that, but also having spoken to one of Ian's sergeants today, there is a World Cafe on the 4th of December, where the police are meeting with women and girls to find out where they feel unsafe so that they can target what they're doing. There's also a International Violence Against Women and Girls Day, and that will start, I think it's the 25th of November, and that will start a 16 days of action. And so Solihull are planning, but we've not got, and once we've got that planned, a campaign to start for those 16 days. And as I say, we're planning to join up with the VRU that I found out today with regards to how we can move as a multi-agency into schools to educate the young people. I think that's all, Lee. Yeah, next one. So it's just any questions, really.
Thank you, Diane. Very informative presentation. Members, are there any questions, Councillor Given?
Surprise. Thanks very much. Just wanted some clarity on the front page of the plan. It says this plan's for the current performance year. And then it goes on to state it covering the 23rd of June 21 to 31st of March 23. So that's my first question. What is this actually covering? Given Ian a bit of a hard time, so I will now move to yourself in that respect. For me, when we're looking at violence against women and girls, and obviously, I suppose politically, obviously, this is a key national issue, and indeed, I think it was the National Police Chief Council only a few weeks ago actually mentioned this is affecting confidence in the police nationally through some horrific events in London, and that is now having an impact across police satisfaction across the country. But I think also when I look at perhaps my own ward in Alton, you know, I've had a murder every year for the last few years, which has been a domestic abuse murder. It's Scott Road this year, Warwick Road the year before. That's quite a lot for one small ward. And I think it really gives us some, perhaps a local focus on, you know, in terms of these high-profile murders, but murders that we get on our streets here in Solihull on a yearly basis. And that's, for me, is probably the more sort of drives it home in terms of the local issues. In terms of, again, I am going to be critical. We've had this priority identified since January. We are now in November. I think you've mentioned that in your report yourself at 3.1. Today, we've got a draft action plan before us. We're at 3.5. We've had one workshop held in July. For me, we're nearly a year in. We've got a draft action plan, which doesn't feature any colours. I presume that they're all essentially red, bar the taxi marshalling, which got approved last week, which is sort of core business. I don't believe this is an issue that we can simply leave until the 11th hour. One, I think the political imperative is too high. Two, people, more importantly, are dying as a result. So that is a public health issue. It's a policing issue. It's a council issue. And it's killing people. So I think I would, again, really reiterate that we've got a draft of a plan here. Acknowledge as this committee that we're 9 months into this plan and there appears to be little being done so far, other than we're still in a scoping phase. And that scanning analysis is important when you tackle any policing or public health issue, but there is also a requirement to actually deliver.
So my apologies, that's the first time I've done a plan for Solihull Council, and I will hold my hands up. That the fact that it's white is because in health we tend to do things that haven't yet started as white. So my apologies, and it is for 21 to 23, not the financial year. So I'll take that. With regards to the domestic abuse killings, as you quite say. Obviously, we've had the domestic bill this year as well, domestic abuse bill, and there is a really established domestic abuse group within Solihull that will feed into the violence against women and girls. And what the violence against women and girls group will do, will take on board the learning from the DHRs, so the domestic homicide reviews. I'm not quite sure if I've answered the whole of that question there, but it will feed in. What I see my role as being is everybody's gone off at different tangents because of the media interest and the national interest, and there's a lot of work going on, but if we aren't careful, we'll end up repeating it. So such as only today I found out about the World Cafe that the police are putting on. We discussed as part of that action plan, that's what we were going to do, but obviously there's things set up already. So we've had to do that wide scoping just so that we can see where the gaps are that we need to do the work in. So and I'm quite happy to come back as Ian comes back in 3 months' time with an update of all that scoping. If that helps.
Any supplementary questions, Councillor Gibbon?
No, that's fine, thank you.
Any, Councillor Groom?
It's just a very brief and easy question here, but obviously you're doing the data capture work at the moment. I was just wondering when that data capture work might be anticipated to be complete so that we can sort of have a look and see the scale of the problem facing this.
I would definitely hope that would be in the next 3 months' report.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Councillor Pinwell.
Thank you, Chair. Reports that I read suggests that when it comes to non-domestic violence, a diet of pornography is a key underlying factor in a significant number of cases because it gives a distorted picture of expectancy of a relationship between man and woman or boy and girl. So I was wondering whether the Solihull team had concluded that that was a factor and needed to be included in the action plan to educate those of all ages, really, from 11 up to adult, to get an understanding that if they do have a diet of such material, that life ain't like that.
That's certainly part of the education for schools about what life is like in reality and cultural behaviours. Pornography, I can't honestly say that has come as a forefront thing, but it's something I'll take back and we'll speak to the VRU about with their education packages.
Councillor Groom?
Sorry, I did have one minor follow-up to my previous thing, which is just, I think, a drafting error in the plan at section 2A, which could be misinterpreted because currently it reads, create a statement that outlines Solihull's commitment to violence against women and girls. I think that might need a tweak.
That will be my typing skills. My apologies.
Councillor Shishibatria, did you want to ask a question or was it?
Thank you, Chair. Well, rather a question, just a couple of things just clicked my mind that I think, again, is it the same 101 number for the women and girls to report any non-emergency concerns? Yeah. And
If I could answer that, Chair. So I think we have got a massive underreporting issue with female victims of crime. And I think that's something that as a partnership we need to look at really closely. I think there is a lack of confidence in the criminal justice system from females. We know that conviction rates, attrition rates in the criminal justice system for offences such as serious sexual assaults and rape are woefully poor. And that's where we need to look at victim support at the start, support from investigators, support from health. What does that experience look like at court? I think it does link back to some of the misogyny type discussions that we're having, which I know we're really keen to work on. That whole culture towards women that starts at schools, that works its way through the nighttime economy, that may represent it in elsewhere as well. So we need to do really hard. We need to work really hard to start to address some of these issues. We need a cultural shift, which isn't going to happen overnight, but we're committed as a partnership to start making some of those inroads as well. I think I just, whilst I've got the mic, if okay, would just like to go on record really and condemn the murder of Sarah Everard and say that this is not representative of policing. I've been a police officer for 22 years and I've spent most of that time as a detective, and I've worked really hard to support victims of crime, including a significant number of female victims of sexual assault and murder, families of murdered victims as well. But absolutely acknowledge that policing is not unique, and that there is some learning that we can take from this, and that we'll take from this as a partnership as well. And you know, our ambition has to be that for young women that want to go out and socialise on the town in Solihull, it's a safe place to do so. We need to switch the language from victim blaming to focusing on the offenders. We never talk about an allegation of burglary, but we talk about an allegation of rape. That's the type of language that I think we need to change as a partnership, and start with a really positive intent. So sorry if I've hogged the mic slightly there, but that is a point that I just wanted to make, because clearly the policing role in this is absolutely critical.
Thank you. I appreciate your response on that. And as we're living in a digital world, can we also try and promote an app like Holy God or something like to encourage women or girls who actually can use that instead of actually calling to 101 or any other calling centers, like, you know, using the app which will capture cause of concern. I've also seen and heard from some other news that there are certain apps which actually capture the last 10 seconds and 30 seconds, even though your mobile is switched off. So any cause of concerns like that. So can we promote and explore options within the digital area as well? Just a suggestion to make that so. Thank you.
Was that Holy God? Thank you.
Thank you. If I could also come in there as well. So we do this really well for hate crime. So third-party reporting for hate crime really does provide us with a broader picture of what's going on. And I think if we do something similar and not utilise apps like you've suggested, I think that'd be a really good way forward.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. While we're on the subject of digital technology, I was just sort of quite curious to understand how you're going to sort of give sort of education around use of social media in this. How's that going to play into the rest of the sort of the program that you've got down here? Thank you.
My understanding is there is already a program in schools about social media and staying safe. It's just plugging into that. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We just want to make sure that we're using all avenues. So that will definitely be a part of the strategy for education.
Councillor Breen.
Just a very quick one. In terms of, obviously, a lot of the problem is obviously online. The platforms that you use switch very, very regularly. So they're not, you know, as I say, so the ones they may have been in the past, Facebook or whatever, that's moved on significantly. How do we keep track of whichever one is on trend, which is being used?
Honestly, I don't know the answer to that. That would be something that I would have to be discussing with the violence reduction unit and that type of thing, but it is part of the plan, so we will do.
Thank you. Any more questions? I have one question. What approaches currently are in place to identify the new and emerging forms of violence against women and girls, so that they can be adequately tackled, and the implication of this will inform the future strategies of tackling violence against women and girls?
To me, that's things like the World Cafe, and you know, going out there and talking to the communities. Where do they feel unsafe or safe? You know, we're looking at a negative connotation, but why do they feel safe in one area? What have we done in one area that we can transfer to another? So it is going out there with communities, with women and girls, and just asking them and keep asking them. So we tackle one area, we get it sorted, then we have the conversation again. It's just that continual conversation.
Thank you. Any more questions? Sorry.
Sorry, Chair. I think I interpreted that question slightly differently than that. So apologies if I've got this wrong. Were you talking about emerging crime types such as drink spiking and needle stick injuries? Was that what you was referring to when you asked the question?
Yeah, something, yeah, emerging new, exactly, absolutely, same.
Okay, so what we have seen in the last week in particular is an increase in those types of offences, which clearly causes us some significant concern. We already have experience across the partnership and with licensing around devices that we can put into open bottles to stop items being administered to the bottles. But what really causes some concern at the moment is the increase in reports of needle stick injuries and substances being administered. I think it would be fair to say it's very early days in trying to understand what the issue is. Currently, we don't really understand what the mechanism for delivery is. We don't understand what substance is being administered, because in the number of cases that we've responded to, there's been a delay in reporting to police, which in turn has sort of rendered the forensic opportunities quite limited. But we're absolutely alive to that as an emerging threat, and we're trying to develop at pace an intelligence understanding of that threat.
Thank you. Councillor Hogarth.
Madam Chairman, maybe I'm getting old in the tooth. I know I am. The point is, though, that we hear about education, education, education. But there's certain things in life, you know what is right and what is wrong. And also it stems, in my opinion, from the parenting today. These people behaving in the way of putting a needle in somebody, spiking a drink, it never happened years ago. What's wrong with society to be actually doing and carrying out these things? It really is appalling. And I do believe that parenting in many cases is part and parcel of the situation that we are going through at this present time. I've been in the past sometimes quite critical of the police, but I think at the present time, in the last few years, they've done an excellent job with the crime that they are having to deal with, stabbings, knifings, almost a daily practice happening in the West Midlands and even in Solihull, sadly. How you deal with all these things, I honestly don't know. But I hope to God that people realise the public have got a lot to answer to, and they have got to try and sort this out themselves in their own home life. Anyway, it's just a little rant of mine, but quite honestly, it's unbelievable what is going on in society today. Knifing, drugging, spiking, all this sort of thing. Dangerous to young ladies going out to have a pleasant evening. God help us for the future.
Right. Members, just to draw your attention to what we are being asked to do, on page 19, paragraph 3.1, 2.1, apologies, to note the content of the Safer Solihull Partnership Action Plan 2021 to 2023 to tackle the violence against women and girls across the borough. Are we in agreement that we have considered that? Councillor Broom.
I think Diane kindly offered to come back in 3 months as well. So if we could also move to add that to the work plan. We're going to have a very busy back end of this year.
We will, and you've just read my mind. I was about to go through that, proposing that recommendation to bring this back in 3 months' time. Thank you. Thank you. So this will now take us to the next agenda item, which is the recovery plan for the Food and Safety Team 2021, pages 31 to 38. This report will be presented by Andrew Callingham, Head of Services, Safer Communities. We have got Andrew tonight with us in person, and Diane Hurd, the team leader for the Food and Safety. Diane is attending us virtually. So who wants to present this report?
Thank you, Chair. I will.
Thank you,
so I
Andrew.
can introduce it. Hello, members. The purpose of the report is to advise you of the recovery plan for the food safety service as we move out of COVID. It's a recovery plan so that we can recommence our, broadly speaking, our food safety activities, mainly to do with inspection of food businesses and dealing with food complaints. Throughout COVID, the service provided significant support to businesses to ensure that they were operating in a COVID-secure way, and particularly supported the events that started to recommence throughout the summer period in Solihull. The recovery plan is directed by the Food Standards Agency, and we have produced a plan in line with the timetable that they have proposed for all local authorities, and that is included in your pack in Appendix 2, which I believe is page 37. The recovery plan itself, the main parts of it are laid out in Appendix 1. I don't, at this stage, intend to go through every, every line of the recovery plan. What I would like to bring out just in two ways is that the first part of the plan, which was the earlier part of the summer and through to the beginning of the autumn period, was really a reactive service to deal with issues arising, new businesses and such like. And the second phase of the plan, as laid out by the Food Standards Agency, is to recommence the more routine food inspection process. What we did in Solihull in the earlier part of the period is that we actually moved on a bit from what the FSA were proposing by employing some additional consultants to ensure that we continue to do a significant level of planned food inspection work to maintain food standards and food hygiene throughout the period. That really is where I tend to leave it at this moment, and I would invite questions for myself and quite possibly Diane if she's there. And she'll probably be able to answer the more technical questions that you have about the service. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Before I ask members for any questions, Diane and Ian, you're more than welcome to stay with us, or please do feel free if you want to. That's absolutely fine. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you. Right, members, have you got any questions? Councillor Gibbon?
It's not a question, Chair, it's just an observation. I've had some lovely feedback from some food businesses in the area recently have been inspected. So it was good to hear that they have been inspected. I think it's really pleasing actually to see we're sort of well on track. And they've been absolutely hammered, all of them, on allergies, which is quite good to see, and being told off and advice has been given appropriately. So I made no apology to them for that. And there's some really good stuff that's just come out. I may well be wrong. It's either the FSA website or it's on the gov/food safety, whatever it is these days. There's some really good training videos there for businesses, especially around allergies and some other bits of labelling, some of the new regs. So it'd be great if we could possibly promote those a bit more. And some of the formal training the government's just released. I couldn't see that on our website or the hyperlinks for businesses.
Sorry, Mayor. Yes, I think we've got a little bit of work to do on the website to develop that side of it. So I'll take that on board and we'll move forward.
Any more questions? Well, thank you. Thank you, Andrew, for presenting the report. I understand that this is a plan which comes on each year for approval or review.
Can I interject there? this is a recovery plan for the food service. Can you hear me, Andy? You're looking a bit confused.
Yes, very loudly.
Oh, really? I'm sorry. I'm only talking normally. I'm sorry.
I wasn't just confused, I was sort of slightly taken aback.
That's okay. I can't, that's my normal talking voice, but sorry. So we always do a annual service plan, but that is going on to Cabinet in January. We're a bit on the back foot, but that will follow the usual sort of Food Standards Agency sort of template. But this is a separate report because it refers to recovery of our service after the pandemic.
Dan, thank you for the clarification. Members, just to draw your attention to what we are asked to do on page 31, paragraph 2.1, that the Scrutiny Board considers the issues within the report with a view to its comments being submitted to the Cabinet member for Safer Communities to approve the implementation of the Food and Safety Services Recovery Plan. Are we in agreement? Brilliant, thank you. Right, so moving on to the next agenda item, which is review of parking displacement program final report, pages 39 to 58. And this is, Lee will give us a brief summary of the report. And I understand that we have got Mark O'Connell, Head of Highways Infrastructure, joining us virtually. We'll take any technical questions if members have. Lee, if you want to present your report, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. The board, at its June meeting, commissioned a task and finish group this year to have a detailed look at the council's parking displacement programme. Section 4 of the report covers the work undertaken, and section 6.1 details the recommendation which is before the board to consider this evening. Mark O'Connell, the council's Head of Highways Infrastructure, who supported the technical component of the review, is virtually this evening. And so Mark is happy to pick up any questions that arise. Chairman.
Thank you, Lee. Members, any questions? Councillor Wilson?
Yes, I understand that option 3B was the one that was agreed. I'm speaking because basically I was on the first of the three meetings on the 15th of July, subbing for Councillor Hamilton, and I think everyone, I think Councillor Hamilton has also said this to me in conversation that we were happy with the option 3B, and I think that was the one that was agreed. So it's just a comment, really. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. So I don't see any other members wants to ask a question. No? Right. So if I draw your attention, members, to paragraph, I think we are on 39. Thank you, Lee. To endorse the task and finish group recommendation, preferred option 3B set out in the report before you, and to endorse the submission of the recommendation to the Cabinet Member for Environment and Infrastructure. Are we in agreement? Thank you. This will take us to the next agenda item, which is the work programme for 2021-2022, pages 59 to 64. And yeah, Alison.
Thank you, Chair. Conscious, I was going to look to ask for an extra item to be included on the January work plan, but picking up as well the fact that we've asked Ian and Diane to come back in January. There are two reports that are on the programme from January that I would like to defer to make room for those two new items. So one item we'd like to add with your agreement is for scrutiny to review the proposals for this community infrastructure levy grants before they go to cabinet portfolio holder for approval in January. And the two reports that we were happy to defer to make room for that would be an update on the Commonwealth Games engagement and communication, because detail is still more to come through on that one. And we had agreed to bring something on the review of the bereavement services. And again, that potentially could wait till the next session if you're happy to agree with that.
Thank you, Alison. Members are Councillor Wilson.
No, Groom, but don't worry, even people within our own group
Apologies,
mix up from time to time.
Councillor Groom. Apologies.
It's just a quick thought that I don't know what the council rules are on adding an additional meeting, but with 2 items coming back and 3 months, I believe, falling in February, would it be possible for us to schedule an additional meeting to hear those 2? I may be making myself deeply unpopular with all the other councillors and officers by even suggesting such a thing. That way we wouldn't have to defer anything. And
I think, Chair, much as I would hate to agree with Councillor Groom on absolutely anything, I'm probably vaguely supportive.
Your members in agreement with Councillor Groom's suggestion to have another meeting in February? Can we plan that, please? Brilliant. Right.
Sorry, Chair, could I just confirm that we could bring the SIL report in January still in order for those decisions to be made by a Cabinet member in January and alter the work with those extra items across
I
January?
think I understand that will be the case. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Right. Any other comments on the work plan, members? No? Okay, so I think that brings this meeting to a close. Thank you, everyone, for your contribution, and have a safe journey home. Thank you.